Welcome to Community Conversations. I'm your host, Steve Mantis, and my guest today is Graham Saunders. Welcome, Graham.
Hi, Steve.
Graham and I actually go back some years. Graham is one of my mentors in learning how to garden in Northwest Ontario, and we first met, I think, in 1970 when I was first building my house here in the country just outside of town. And you were one of the fellows I started helping you in your garden, and started learning about that and get inspired on taking on my own. So, what got you into gardening in the first place, Graham?
It dates back a little bit more than that. That's a long time ago, isn't it?
It is. Oh my gosh! Look at those gray hairs.
Let's not get sidetracked by that. So I had a little bit of gardening experience as a kiddo with my aunt and uncle, but it really began when I had a place in Thunder Bay, and I was going to university, and I was going off to work in Thompson, Manitoba. And I thought, I'm going to plant a garden. This is a dumb idea, right? Really, because you plant a garden, walk away from it. But I did that, and I worked for not a lot of weeks. And then I came back, and poof, all these little seeds that I had put in the ground actually had accomplished something. I had carrots, pretty simple garden, onions, carrots, and such. And I thought, I'm not sure I thought it was easy, but I thought, this is great. And so from that time on, I thought, okay, I can do this. It gave me some confidence, and I got right into it. And as you know, I have some background in weather. So for me, gardening and weather are interchangeable and interdependent.
And clearly the weather in Northwest Ontario is a real challenge for gardeners. You know, we have such a small, short growing season. How the heck do we produce those lovely vegetables we want to have, within that framework of uncertain weather? You've studied this for some years. And in fact, you brought along a book you've written about gardening here in Northwestern Ontario. Give me some sense of how you've learned along the way and why you chose to write a book about it.
And the book is called Gardening with Short Growing Seasons, so who knew we would have short growing seasons, but there they are. It is fascinating because I think in many ways we have many advantages when we get into gardening here. We have clear skies, better sunlight, that's what that means. And so we have better growth of crops unless it's too cold. And if it's too cold or going to be too cold, then there's things that we can do to not eliminate frost, but we can avoid the problems with it. That includes designing a garden to accommodate that, so cold air will drain somewhere else where we don't want it to be. And also, if in emergencies, we can cover our sensitive crops like tomatoes, peppers, and so on. And if there's a barrier above them, between those very cold conditions, then we avoid frost right on those plants. So, and another emergency measure, I predict the frost. So I cover the garden before the evening before. But every once in a while, you get up and say, oh, there's frost. I can see frost on the roof or the grass or whatever. So what you can do there is actually take a garden hose and spray the plants that you want to protect. A lot of them don't matter. In the growing season, your carrots will be okay, your peas will be okay, lettuce and things like that. But certainly things like squash, pumpkins, tomatoes, and if you have that kind of, better to cover them the night before and trap some of that heat. But if you miss it, then you can still get out there and water the vegetables.
So let me ask you a little bit more about the location of the garden. You talked about designing the garden so that the cold air drains away. I know one of my neighbors talked about that he chose to put his potato patch kind of in the middle of the forest. So they had a little clearing, but they were surrounded by trees, and he said that helped to protect it. Does that work, or what other ways can you design your garden to maximize the heat and reduce the cold?
Well, I haven't tried that enterprising trick, but
Me neither.
what I do, and certainly the terrain you have that is a given with your garden is important here. But what I have is a southerly slope. So the warm, the sensitive plants like peppers and tomatoes are on the top of that slope next to the house. And then at the bottom of that slope, I have other lettuces and other cool weather crops. And what happens there on a cold night, air is like water, and it'll drain according to the terrain. So if you have a slope, the cold air will slide down that slope, and it'll go somewhere that it doesn't matter anymore. So your temperature with your tomatoes, just use as an example, will be warmer on the top of the garden than it will be at the bottom of the garden by a degree or two. And a degree or two is pretty important.
Right. So let's just take a look at your book here.
It's a lot of pages, but
well, let's just look at the cover anyways.
Okay.
Let people know
Okay.
what it looks like if they're interested. So we do have real challenges with our weather here. What are some of the tips that people might find in that book if they were to go out and take a look or get it at the library, wherever?
Yeah, it is, as far as I know, it's still available at the various libraries. It sells out on a regular fashion, so I haven't reprinted many copies lately. So what we can do, one of the things I mentioned is we can design the garden that the cold air will flow somewhere else. And in emergencies, we can cover certain parts of the garden, and that might involve building some kind of, you can do it with whatever, you can cover with newspapers in an emergency, but better to have some kind of structure. And I have, for the tomatoes, I have a few simple posts in the ground and a fence, top of fence rail across them. And Kirsten, my wife, and I can drag a piece of polyethylene over that whole thing in a couple of minutes. So that'll protect the garden overnight, both trapping a little bit of warmth in there and also protecting from frost. So that's one thing to do. Paying, I guess, careful attention to when to plant and also when to water and things like that. That's we can get a lot more out of our gardens if we're fairly attentive about that. On that point, I'll just mention that it's not a great idea to water. It might be convenient for you, but it's not for the plants. If you have a nice, hot, sunny day and you're watering your plants, you're not doing them any good at all because that will actually cool the plants. Evaporation, and the plants will stop growing that day. It's counterintuitive, but that's what happens.
Oh my goodness. We're going to take a short break here. We'll be right back. Please stay with us.